Way to escapely. Today we're going to be discussing the Aeneid. What we've got here is possibly the greatest epic poem ever written in Latin. For a long time in the Middle Ages, at least in the Western world, this was considered the greatest thing ever written. Period. We've got here a subject, a painting of Virgil reading the Aeneid to the Emperor Augustus, Octavia, and Livia. So Augustus and his family. Aeneid very famously is unfinished when Virgil dies in 19 BCE, and supposedly Virgil had gotten sick when he was traveling around the Mediterranean looking for local flavor, things to include in the Aeneid. He gets back to Italy. He had been writing this poem for the better part of a decade, and Augustus finds out he's sick and goes to visit Virgil. Augustus, the great Roman emperor, had actually paid for the Aeneid to be written. Virgil does not recover. He keeps getting sicker, and eventually he dies, supposedly in Augustus's arms. And his last request to Augustus is to burn everything that he's written over the last 10 years. He says, "I'm not done. I haven't finished it. It's not good." Reportedly, Augustus agrees to do this. And when Virgil dies, he sits down, reads the Aeneid over the course of a couple of days, and comes out shaking and says, "I can't do it. This is too good." So, what is the Aeneid about? The Aeneid primarily is about Aeneas. He is the dutiful hero. He is the second greatest Trojan warrior after Hector. He is an ally of Troy. He's not actually Trojan. He's from Dardania, a place like north of Troy, I believe. His most important quality is his pietas. This is respect. This is duty. It's the parts of honor that have to do with loyalty and following your organization, your country, your family, your gods. He actually has a bit part in the Iliad. And in the Iliad, what happens is he has a fight with Diomedes. Diomedes smashes his hip with this big stone. And Aeneas tries to keep fighting. He actually tries to stand up after this and is saved by his mother. That sounds kind of weird until you realize that Aeneas' mother is an immortal goddess, Venus. Venus promises that Aeneas is, destined for greater things than dying on the battlefield, saves his life, heals him, and he actually keeps fighting. He's shown on the battlefield a few times after that in the Iliad. And then in Greek myth, they never see him again. Virgil writes Aeneas' story using some Italian folklore and some traditions that he escaped from Troy and actually made it to Italy and founded the people who eventually became the Romans. He's like the great ancestor of Romulus and Remus. Let's talk about how he actually does that. First off, time to review the fall of Troy itself. Trojan War lasts for 10 years. Greeks seem to leave in force after a couple of their great heroes die. If you remember your Iliad, if you remember the end of the Trojan War, it's an extremely tragic period of time at the end where all these characters that the audience has grown to know and love, that the readers have grown attached to, end up dying. Patroclus, Achilles' best friend, gets killed by Hector. In a rage, Achilles kills Hector, the great Trojan hero. In response, Achilles is fated to die shortly afterwards. He gets that famous arrow to the heel from Hector's brother Paris, who also dies in this. Ajax, the great Greek hero, the person they figured would be the one to break down the doors, over a dispute of the armor of Achilles, goes mad, becomes horrendously embarrassed by this, and takes his own life. With the greatest Greek heroes dead, they leave, and the only thing left is the greatest trick in all of military history. They leave this great wooden horse on the beach, the size of a hill. The Trojans argue about what to do with it, but one Greek spy who was left there claims that they were going to sacrifice him to go home, and they couldn't end up doing it. He escaped, and says that if the Greeks bring the horse into the city, that fate says that the entire Greek fleet will sink on the way home. The Trojans party all night for this. They dance, they drink. 10 years of fighting gone. There are children. Aeneas' own son was born during the war, and the Greeks were the boogeymen. Don't wander away or the Greeks will get you. Aeneas goes home to spend the night at home with his family. He doesn't go out and party. He goes to bed early. And we get a detail about Aeneas that's actually very realistic and very tragic, something that a lot of people who fight will tell you about today. Even though Aeneas is the greatest fighter left in the city after the death of Hector, even though he's a capable fighter and everyone respects him, Aeneas is plagued with nightmares about the war. He hopes that the nightmares will stop when he goes to sleep after this. But in his nightmare, he sees Hector, his friend, his brother-in-law, as a ghost, his face all torn up from being dragged behind Achilles' chariot. And Hector tells Aeneas, you have to go. The war is lost. Aeneas pops out of bed. He wipes some sweat off his brow, but when he looks out of his window, he sees his city on fire. And his immediate reaction is duty to his country. He tries to go save his king. Aeneas fights his way through the city. He makes his way to the palace. There's fire everywhere, confusion everywhere. People hardly know who they're supposed to be fighting. You have to remember that this is an age before uniforms. Aeneas makes it to the palace, and he's able to sneak in by climbing up a neighboring building and jumping across. But he doesn't live in the palace, even though his wife Creusa is a princess of Troy. He gets lost, and he finds himself on a balcony overlooking a courtyard, and he sees King Priam down in that courtyard. Priam is old. His family has been decimated by the war. Traditionally, Priam was said to have had like 50 sons and 50 daughters, or 50 kids, whichever makes more sense to you. And most of his sons have died in this war. Priam has strapped on his armor for the first time in decades, and the doors burst open. Aeneas looks, he can't jump down. He's got no spears to throw. He's got no bow and arrow. There is no way for him to defend his king, as the fastest man he has ever seen burst into that door, wearing the armor of Achilles. It turns out that this is Achilles' son, Pyrrhus, sometimes called Neoptolemus, and he's laughing as he does it. This is a child. He's like 12, 13, 14, maybe years old. And he's covered in blood all the way up to his elbows, and laughing about it. He's a hero. He's killing Trojans left and right, making dad proud. Priam confronts the son of Achilles, trying to save what's left of his family. He says, I knew your father. Your father had honor. Your father respected the gods when things got tough, and he knew how to respect his enemies. All Pyrrhus says to this, laughing, he says, well, you're going to see my dad really soon. Just tell him I've inherited all his worst qualities. Priam rears back, throws his spear, and it bounces harmlessly off of the shield of Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus throws his spear, and it goes straight through the strongest part of Priam's shield and cuts his side. He's all tied up with the shield there. And in a flash, this terror is on top of him. He knocks Priam over, yanks off of his helmet, and drags him to an altar to kill him. When Aeneas sees this, he realizes that he can't save his city. The war is lost. But seeing Priam trying to defend his family reminds Aeneas in a shock of what he still has to do. He rushes out, makes his way back out of the palace, finds some way out of it, and runs back to his own family. This leads to the defining image of Aeneas. Aeneas escaping with his family. His father originally says, son, leave me, take the kids, take your wife, take the gods, get out of here. And Aeneas refuses. He literally picks his father up on his shoulder, grabs his son by the hand, tells his wife, the only other capable adult in the room, follow behind me, and makes his way to a secret exit that he knows about. You have to realize how dangerous this is for Aeneas. Can he fight like this? No, of course he can't. His father takes these religious idols, the lares and penates, the things that every Roman would keep in their home, out of the city of Troy. Technically speaking, the Trojans didn't actually have this, but Virgil includes it to make that continuity between Troy and Rome. Almost any depiction of Aeneas that you're ever going to see, if you Google image search Aeneas, you will see pictures of him carrying his father. There's a couple of other scenes from the Aeneid that are pretty good, but this is the moment everyone remembers. Start thinking for a little bit about what his father means, what his father represents. There's symbolism in this scene. Pause the video if you need a minute. All right. So his father, carrying tradition, carrying religion out of Troy, is the past. And that makes his son the future. Aeneas cares about continuity. He cares about family. This is that duty. This is that respect. This is that looking to things that are bigger than him. And he makes his way through the city, twisting turns. Every time he sees Greeks, anytime he sees people fighting, he's got to turn away down another blind alley, another way, hoping that he can get his family out of the city. And he makes it. He gets this way to this tunnel, this long, cramped tunnel. He's got to hunch over with his father on his shoulder because the ceiling's so low. It's really dark. It's damp. People are screaming behind him, ahead of him. And Aeneas trudges almost a quarter mile underground. Eventually, his muscles aching, he gets outside. He makes it into the nightlight again, where it's cool and it's quiet. And then his son says something that breaks Aeneas' heart. He says, "Where's Mom?" Aeneas puts his father down, immediately goes back into this tunnel, and looks for his wife, screaming her name once he gets back into the city. He can't find her. Goes almost all the way back to his house. When he realizes this, in a rage, he throws himself into battle, goes immediately after the first Greeks he can find, and hopes to die, throwing his life away if it comes to that. But the thing is, Aeneas is the greatest fighter in Troy. He's probably the greatest fighter in both armies at this point. There's sort of a pre-Roman tradition that Aeneas did escape from the city. And literally he had backed himself into an alleyway and fought everybody who came at him until the Greeks, terrified, let him walk out in the morning. Virgil in the Aeneid changes this. Instead, after Aeneas defeats this first group of enemies, his mother Venus appears to him, begs him to leave. And he's still not about to do it until he sees the ghost of his wife, when he knows he can't find her. And Aeneas, crying his eyes out, makes his way back to this tunnel. He goes back through the tunnel. He goes out empty-handed. His son cries, and Aeneas looks over the people who are left. About 2,000 Trojans escaped through that tunnel. They're desperate, leaderless, completely unorganized. When morning comes, they see this huge line of Greeks, this enormous Greek army, carrying their city away from them. All the riches, the gold, the wine, the cloth, the statues, slaves, in a mile-long line to these ships. They hold up for a couple of days until the Greeks leave. They pick over the city, and they realize right away that there's nothing there for them. They can't live there anymore. They have to go. And Aeneas has to lead him. His heroism is an interesting one. We see a complex character, a character who cries in the face of huge emotion. We see someone who defends his family, who defends what's left of his city, and leads these people to something better. That's it for this video. We'll continue on next time with the wanderings of Aeneas. But I want you to get the big things from this. What kind of person Aeneas is, that great image of him carrying his father, leading his son, and what he has to do now. Take care.